Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our LinkedIn Live panel discussion for today. That is SAP's future is public cloud. Are you ready for it? I'm your host, Ross Orrit, and I'm joined by a couple of my esteemed colleagues that joined us on our last couple of panel discussions, and we found it so invigorating that we invited them back to have this very interesting conversation. For those that are joining here, we have a comment section that you'll see on the sidebar that you can add in comments. And I'd love to start out by hearing where everybody's calling from. I know for myself, I'm in sunny Phoenix, Arizona today and enjoying the nice weather here. Hopefully everybody has the same from where they're at. And let's maybe get started by introducing our panel. So joining us first is Sanna Asher, who's the CEO of Masterclass for SAP. And she's an ERP transformation specialist with deep expertise in S/4HANA implementations.
Thank you, Ross. Hello, everyone.
Yeah, good morning. And I'm joined by Patrik Fiegl, who is the senior SAP program leader at Tricentis, who has extensive global project experience and really has a real passion for the whole quality element that is critical in these transformations. And finally, I'm joined by Bernhard Lang, who's the co-founder of LeapGreat and was the former CEO of MSG Global, which is a global SI dedicated to SAP ERP. And it looks like Bernd and Sanna have joined from the same location. They're digs.
Yes, we have.
Whereas Patrick and I just have bookcases to show for ourselves here.
There we go. Yeah. So I'm joining from Vienna today and very happy to be on the call here again. Hi, Sanna. Hi, Bernhard. Great to be back on the show with you.
Absolutely. Hi, Patrick. I'm joining in from New York. So yeah, very cozy cabin in New York.
Yes, same room in Munich, Germany, already afternoon. Nice to meet you guys.
All right. We've got certainly a global presence, and we see some folks joining in from Vancouver, for example, and so great to see everybody from around the globe. So maybe kicking things off, I find it interesting for myself having, worked around SAP, but not so in depth as you guys have, is I did a little reading and was listening to an interview from Christian Klein, the CEO, where he talked about his day one focus as the SAP CEO was accelerating the on-premise software companies' move to the cloud. But it's strange to me, why is there even a debate on public or private? It seems to me like this is kind of like a no-brainer. The whole world is moving to the cloud. You've got, I remember 20 years ago when Salesforce talked about no software, they were first to SaaS. Why wouldn't that be the same with ERP? I suspect that all the small and mid-sized companies just default to that. I kind of joked to, why do we even have to have this discussion? Isn't this just a no-brainer? And love to get your, maybe Sanna, maybe I'll kick off for you as, why is there even a debate on public versus private?
Sure, absolutely, Ross. I think that's a great question. And the only reason there's this debate is because the entire landscape of the ERP, is changing. So what I mean by that is in a perpetual license or an on-prem situation, clients had more control. For whatever reason, clients are now thinking, I go to the cloud, I do a SaaS solution, I'm going to lose control. So obviously, number one is a control issue, right? And number two, again, best practices. If I go into doing the public cloud model, I have to adhere to the best practices. So that is some of my thoughts.
What about maybe Bernd, from your experience, having dealt with a lot of these large customers, should there even be a debate, or what's the debate that you hear regularly?
I think the ultimate goal is clear. Sooner or later, everybody will be in a public cloud multi-tenant environment. That's the most efficient. But I think there is also a different perspective on that, because I think customers spend too much money in the past to migrate from one technology platform to the next generation. And continuously, every 15, 20 years, you are changing your complete system, and you are constantly investing in technology. And I think this time is over. So I think customers will make one last move into a public cloud environment, and then it's rather how do you improve your experience, how can you consume key technologies, and we are entering a complete new era. And the question, public cloud or not, I think that's already answered. It's just the question, how fast? Is it one step? Is it maybe an interim step in between? That's something what we can discuss today as well. And I'm curious to see the opinion of the colleagues about that. But ultimately, we will be in the public cloud. There is no doubt about that.
So it's more a question of how and when, it sounds like, Bernd, from what you discuss. And I'm wondering, but how are customers making these kind of decisions today? And maybe I can ask, from your experience, Patrik, as you interact with customers, how are they deciding, are they, exploring it in the proper way, and how are they making them today?
If the business drives, this is not a question. Yeah? If the business says, I want, a different way of, for instance, engaging my employees, retaining my knowledge. We always speak about, customer engagement, but let's talk about the internal, population for a moment. If I want to do this, right, then the means is absolutely secondary, because what's at stake here is keeping, the gold, if you're a knowledge-based company, so you do have gold in, your people's loyalty to the company, in your people's heads, in your people's experience. And therefore you will pay what it takes to get this done. The question about the means to making it fast, to making it capable of giving you insight, right? And this is the center of the narrative, I think, today, to say, can we do something with IT systems that is not simply operational, where we just transact and, accumulate posting after posting after posting, and then we can close the books and start posting again. No, but that we actually can take what is there to predict what's going to happen, to sort of actively accompany the working, in this case, it's of the workforce, to say, okay, we have, here indications that someone might be a flight risk, for instance, right? They're spending a lot of time, doing these things or something like that, right? So again, if the value is clear, right? If the motivation for process adjustment, capability adjustment is clear, the choice, sort of falls in place. It becomes a little bit of the question of, to Bernhard's point, can I do it already, right? Because the end goal is clear. It's utter simplification. It is making those costs, as low as possible. You can argue for variability. I mean, there are different schools of thought there. The subscription model is not necessarily cheaper, but, I think different discussion, right? You can argue to some extent that it is. But I think clearly it becomes a topic around make it in such a way that we can, go with this solution into a future and evolve. Yeah, those were not considerations we really had when I started. Right, my first experiences were very much you have a utterly difficult and detailed discussion, creating a specification. Yeah, in German it's the document of duties, we call it, the Pflichtenheft. So this is something very rigorous, right? So Bernhard knows what I'm talking about. And then you threw that over the fence and then waited for 2 years, and then you came into the room. It's like, well, this is not exactly what we had envisioned, right? But okay, too late because we spent $2 billion, right? We are in a very different situation now, right? People have a different perspective. Okay, enough said maybe from my perspective.
Yeah, but I think you raise an interesting point that, so to the question of how they're making decisions, the first thing is kind of the business decisions. But one of the things I'm, seeing is that, a lot of people still seem to be thinking this is a technical decision, public versus private. I don't know if, Bernd, you can characterize, if different companies that you see, or maybe I'll ask Sanna about as how they're approaching these decisions, if they're, and some, are they making them for technical decisions, or how are they thinking this through?
I think the technical perspective is the minor or the secondary one. It's a complete change for companies. Yeah, if you move into the cloud, it's a complete change how you operate your business. It's also a change for the IT companies and the standard software providers, also how they develop their software and how they deploy it to the customers. So it goes across the whole organization, and it's really a complete organizational change if you work in a cloud environment or if you operate your own IT environments. And just one efficiency argument that came into my mind, I mean, from a software engineering perspective, in the past, a software developer was developing his code, then I think they had quality gates. It took them a while until they put everything on a CD, then they shipped it to the client, then they were going through the Pflichtenheft, what Patrik was just saying, the whole design exercise, and then there was a time difference maybe of 2 years or even more from the coding until the code is used and we figure out there's a problem, right? In cloud, you have that immediately, right? The software engineer develops something and immediately you see the impact if this code works or not. So maybe in my first example, the guy has resigned already. I can't get him anymore. He's not available anymore. And now I have to deal with this code. So it's so far more efficient to work in the cloud environment. This was the standard software perspective, but also the users, it's totally different, right? In the past, it was a massive implementation project to move from R2 to R3 to the different versions to S4 and now into the cloud. These are massive projects, right? But it will be the last big projects what our clients have to do. And now they're able to consume digital key technologies as well. They have access to technology that they don't have if they run their own IT. So especially for the mid-sized companies, it's a huge opportunity that they get access to technology that they never have if they run their environments completely on their own. So that's why I think it's a massive change. It's a philosophical, and I think.
Yeah. So Patrik, you were just going to.
Sorry, my picture was gone for a second. So sorry.
Just to footnote, because I think that the argument, especially for mid-sized companies having access to something that they couldn't otherwise have access to, fully agree. This is true a fortiori to talent. Yeah. So the talent that is basically on the side of the providers is world-class talent, right? Just think about the talent needed for mastering security these days, right? Crypto, cybersecurity, right? It's impossible to find these people. I mean, number one, the numbers are not there, and secondly, you couldn't afford them if you found them, right? So I think again, from an organizational perspective, it becomes a lot more clear that while there are very difficult technical questions, so let's not downplay this, right? And there is need for people who understand those, so architects and people who do this. That is certainly important, and maybe even more important than before. There are organizational aspects here that really drive this.
So maybe I'll just circle back around to Sandy. Yeah, I guess I'm still trying to get to the question of how are these people making these decisions today to go to public cloud? So this is all good, but I'm going to kind of keep poking on this one.
Yeah, I just want to add something to what Bernd and Patrik said, right? I think the other thing, which is what we're seeing with many customers, is the entire time to market, right? I think Bernd and Patrik both kind of touched upon that, right? Writing the code, maybe it's two, when you look at it, it's 2 years later. Today, I think companies have the opportunity, whether they're mid-sized or enterprise clients, to go to market with their product and services faster when they are on a platform, a cloud platform, right? Which was not the case, a decade ago or even 5 years ago. So yes, while we do talk about, hey, do I have enough control, or is subscription the way to go, or is it cheaper? But I think the other piece is I can go do things faster. I don't have to wait for 2 years to get the code to make sure things are working. So I can, it's a decision that you get, it's a trade-off pretty much.
Yeah, and maybe just as a point of clarification, because there's a question from the audience there about private cloud. Are we referring to an on-prem scenario, or are we talking about, essentially here private versus public is rise versus grow in SAP's terminology? I don't know if anybody wants to take that because it's a bit more, technical question.
It changes by the year, maybe.
Yes.
So, it's a hot potato. I remember when I worked for SAP, that we had academic discussions on the topic, and then you were supposed to say certain things and other things not, and so forth. But basically, it's a question of degrees of cloudiness. Yeah. So private is basically something that is still hosted. There's still some hyperscaler involved. It's not in your four walls, so to speak. Versus public is completely managed by the vendor. Now, there can be footnotes to this, as always in life, right? You could have something that is an appliance-based private, so that could actually be in your, fort, and could be managed in that way. So it ends up being a little bit the ownership, of the management process. That's what I would say the key differentiator. One is completely with the vendor, and you're consuming all that, and the other one has more responsibility on the customer side, typically through facilitation of some SI or some application hosting party.
Yeah, so I guess what we would say from an SAP point of view, what they call GROW is really the public cloud, where they're, on a more of a standard, software, versus RISE, where it may be customized, much like you had, done with on-premise, but it's still, both are in the cloud, but one is more highly customized, more akin to what an on-premise solution used to be. Maybe a better way to define that. I was going to just circle back around to, where we talked about this, how things were done in the past, where you spend a couple of years, you kind of gather requirements, all that kind of traditional way. Then, 2 years later, you finally get that sort of system. But how are people still approaching this, decision of public versus private, or if they just approach this decision, I assume they can't do things that same way, where they spend a whole lot of time analyzing this. So how would they, which seems to me to be like looking at the past about what they have today, how would they approach it with public cloud? Is there a different way that they need to approach thinking about, can they go to public cloud that's different than just navel gazing, looking at their current system? So maybe I'll start with Sanna to say, how would they approach it differently to say, can I go to public?
I think, Ross, the first question is, how can I standardize, right? If I can standardize on my business processes, right? Can I take that, move it to a cloud, and can my business run on standard process or best practices, as we've called it? I think that's kind of my thought process there.
Okay, that's very interesting. Anybody, so if we just drill down on that a bit, so how does one, figure out if they can run on standard? Like,
it's very important that you get early visibility. What's the coverage of the clean core in the case of SAP? So does it give you 80% of your business processes, or is it only 60%? And I think that can support your decision. Yeah, if you have a low coverage from this clean core scope, then it's rather expensive because you have to do everything with the extension platform. Yeah, then you need massive BTP developments, and then of course this is increasing your cost. And then of course if you have a high degree of individualization, then also the update cycles are painful for you. So I think the requirement is really, do you comply with that standard? Do you have a high degree of standardization, and to get early visibility on that, and then choose the right path, right? I mean, some other vendors are more strict. Yeah? If we compare SAP maybe with other vendors, so they just offer public cloud now. Yeah, they don't give you the option. They say, this is our model, take it. SAP has still other options. And that's because I believe SAP is far more comprehensive. SAP is offering more functionality than everybody else. That's why it's also more complicated to standardize that. It's far easier if you have a small solution to standardize that scope. It's far easier than standardizing something like a SAP ERP with all the industry solutions, with all the specifics that we have. So it's a far more complicated exercise. And that's why I think it's a difficulty that you mainly see in the SAP world, that customers are struggling. Can I go already to public cloud? I think over time this will get easier because public cloud will get a bigger scope, and then of course the gap will get smaller and smaller over the time. But right now I think we still have customers with massive add-ons, with massive custom code individualization, with industry add-ons which are not available maybe on the S4 public cloud, and that's why it's still a difficult decision for SAP clients. Yeah.
Maybe I could just drill down on that and sort of understand, how do you assess, can you go to standard? How do you get this early visibility? Can you give us some more specifics?
Sorry, Patrik.
Whoever, but I guess fit to standard is precisely the term, right? So it is as opposed to doing your gap fit analysis like in the old days and saying, oh, I need to have it this way, my way, and now let's do whatever with it. In the cloud world, the question is the other way around: is can you actually adjust your way of working to the way how the software works? Now that's kind of the methodology element to it, but of course this is predicated on the capability being there, right? And where I think now we need to make a little bit of a distinction, right? While the road is pointing in one direction, there might be absolutely critical things that are an impediment to continue the road, like fundamental capability missing, right? So it is not functionally comparable at this point what we have in the private cloud and the public cloud. The public cloud is more limited. The public cloud has obviously the I would say very, very seamless integration of analytics, of a user experience that is fresh, also of a configuration process that is very streamlined. So wonderful things that you really want. But if you need certain things, for your industry, right? I worked for the steel industry for many years, and when you have a product like steel that is like a salami, right? You don't sell it in SKUs, but you kind of cut off pieces, and then because they're so expensive, you put the rest back to stock. That's a complex matter that the standard doesn't easily deliver. If that's what your business is, you're not going to go into a solution where you have to stop your business, right? So, and I guess that's also an example that many companies will be able to relate to, because very often the specificity is in the industry, right? So it's not so much is finance different, because it's not, but or is the core order management different, because it's not, but in the way how your product and how your sort of value models and how your interaction with the customer and specifying what they need specifically around it, if those are met, then the fit to standard will be a yes, and then we can proceed. Yeah.
And how does one do that? Because certainly, to see your system, it's kind of like a chicken and egg. You have to have it ready to see it sort of working to be able to assess that. I was wondering, like SAP offers things like their digital discovery assessment. Is that sufficient to do that sort of exercise, or what? I'm curious what it will or won't tell you about this kind of fit to standard that you described. I don't know, Santa, you were nodding your head. I assume you've got some thoughts.
I because I think it's an interesting question, Ross. I think obviously the number one thing, right, as we talk about in SAP transformations, planning. So a phase 0 plan to even understand what you have in your landscape, right? And understand, to Bernd's point, right? Where do the the customizations go, right? What kind of work do you do in BTP? So I think to understand where do you need to go, you have to take a step back and look at the phase 0, look at what you have to make a better decision to say, how do you move forward? So I think definitely starting with the phase 0, starting with planning, of course, that is a good start.
But how does that phase 0? Because if you're looking in the past, I think of that in my own mind as kind of like archaeology. But if you could list, and I think these ECC systems, you often have so many different customizations. And would you spend too much time looking at that, or do you really need to look to the future first, ask the question, why can't I do that, and then try to bring forward, I think to Patrik's point, like in that steel example, there may be specific criteria that doesn't fit with the standard, and can you bring that forward? Will it work? Or and if it doesn't, then you're kind of, the decision to go public is kind of made. You've got to move with private because your special sauce is unique enough that can't be, say, supported in public. So I'm sort of debating in this mind, do you start with the future or start with the past?
I'll tell you where my mind's at with that, right, Ross? So I think with the phase 0, what my suggestion is, at least you get a blueprint of what you have, and then possibly it is that what you have in ECC may probably now be best practice or fit to standard in S4 or the public cloud. So for all your customizations will automatically either go away and it'll be best practice. So I think it's good to peek back a little bit into the past, not completely make it an archaeological, expedition, but use that to create a better future. That's kind of where my thought process is.
Would it be fair to say that maybe that focus is a bit more on what's kind of unique to your business versus trying to look at, like, if I think of how do I process an invoice, that's kind of like
That's standard.
Every company does it. Is there really any special sauce for that? But there's probably things like what you do in your business. Is there some examples there? I don't know, for Bernd and Patrik, where you've seen with customers where how they balance that, how much time they spend looking at the past versus focused on the future?
I mean, the biggest benefit and the biggest value of a cloud transformation you get if you really focus on the future. I mean, many customers look at the past, but they miss the opportunity. Just technically lift and shift your old environment into a new environment, you miss a huge opportunity to get rid of maybe complexity that was grown over the time. I think it's a great opportunity, but it requires that you mentioned that digital assessment. I think that's a good orientation. I think you can go further than that. I think you can even give the customers already, how does your future look like?
Right.
What's the future experience? Give them a system and then let them experience that, because that gives the trust to the end users, and they say, okay, it's really there. I can visualize that. I can understand how my process will work in the future. And then, of course, you really need a good governance. And as you said, I mean, the commodity processes, you shouldn't have a debate around that. How to create an invoice, if you differentiate in that field, you do something wrong, right? You should focus on your core processes. You can also make investments and make some individualizations in your core processes that really are valuable to you. But on the commodity generic things, you can reduce complexity. And sometimes what I've seen is that customers are sitting on really old implementations. So they have done technical shifts maybe 2-3 times, but they never worked on the business model. And sometimes they even don't know how does the standard evolved in the meantime. What is new functionality in the standard? They're not aware of that. And I think in the context of a cloud transformation, it definitely makes sense to see what's in there, and then see, okay, where does it make sense to really invest money in the individualization, and where we just use the standard as is. And that's the ideal scenario from my perspective. And it requires a good governance, of course, because end users tend to ask exactly the same what they have today. So it requires good moderation and also good consulting support on your way into the cloud. So it's getting more business oriented. You need more business consulting skills also on this journey, and not so much technical skills like in the past, right? You either need a guide who takes you at his hand and is making that transition with you.
Now, it's very interesting that you mentioned that, because what strikes me is that these aren't, people think private versus public, it's a technical issue, to decide technically what we would do. But everything you're saying is, the technical part is, how do I get rid of this technical debt that is accumulated over all these upgrades and move to what may be standards, so that, in doing so, you reduce your technical debt that you have, and the business is probably in a better state. I would assume that with doing that, I'm just wondering from your perspective, Patrik, with kind of your focus on quality, moving back to standard, I got to believe it, may make the quality of the actual, the move even better, as opposed to if you do like sort of like a technical lift and shift to the what they have before. I don't know if you have any perspective from customers on how this move, if you do this properly going to public, increases the quality of the actual system that they're running.
So I would say the quality is easier to manage if you have less variability, and by standardizing, obviously you have a way of reducing, if you would, the set of options, and you can basically also rely on what has been validated from the vendor, because they would not be able to release this into SaaS. It's basically a go live every time they do this, if it hadn't fundamentally been tested, right? So now you're making the specific validation within the specific settings that you're doing, showing that this also works with your specific configuration. So I think the argument can be made, right? Now I would like to add a connector here in our discussion, and that is, in addition to thinking about or assessing that I can work a certain way, so is the functionality sufficient for me? Is it possible for me to standardize, to that extent? There are a great number of tools that SAP, brings to the table to show what you have been doing so far with your legacy system. So if you're starting on the ECC side, right, there are these readiness checks that expose all the technical debt, if you would, that you have incurred, right? If you use process mining, you can look at what type of executions actually did you perform, and what is your variability in your whatever procure to pay, for instance, right? So these are not things that require consultative engagements and kind of poking, but these are today things that can be delivered very, very quickly. And then once you have seen sort of what are these things that need to be cleaned up, and you rank them and say, okay, which ones are absolutely needed by the business, going back to the points about unique, ways of working, you kind of distill it, to the core that you need to think about, right? And there we have the BTP platform, but we also have other things today, right? So for instance, I realized just this week that with the what do they call them, digital adoption platforms, WalkMe, acquired by SAP, you basically have a way of customizing system behavior now that is at a completely different level, right? You can enforce rules that will actually condition the interaction with the system even after the system is deployed, right? You establish a type of surface, right, that still acts differently, right, that can pre-populate fields, right, that can enforce rules from you doing certain things. So here we have other layers even of doing what is referred to as extensibility and customization, that were simply not there before, that can introduce ways of working that are unique to you, right, without actually touching what you want to keep as clean as possible, right? And the term clean is exactly the term that SAP has been pushing here to say the core shall be clean. Why? Because it goes back to the quality question, to some extent, because it makes your system simple, right? And it makes your system also agile. It's then a system that can be quickly, moved again and be made to introduce the next type of change, the next type of innovation.
Yeah. So what I'm sort of hearing, like to date, we've sort of talked about, the key questions. Can I run standard? You want early visibility for that. You've got these tools from SAP that'll let you do some of that early phase zero kind of inventory and assessment of things versus having to do big consultative projects. So you can get that kind of first, part to then start looking at what's available in standard, because it's probably much more robust than when they first put in as part of that. So there's kind of these techniques around that. But one of the things that I find interesting, just as I see a lot of SAP ecosystem, they're still pushing ECC customers to brownfield implementations, which I think would lend to much more of just get them on RISE. And I don't know but I'm wondering, is the ecosystem really ready to move to the cloud or move to public cloud in particular? Is that
the SI? Yeah, that's it's a big change for them, right? And it's a big change, I think, for many people involved in the conversation. I think the ecosystem that has seen the signs of the times are shifting towards other areas where they can contribute their knowledge. So I heard a very impactful presentation. Can we say customer names here?
If the customer, if it's public, sure, why not?
Yeah. It was at a public event. I guess it's posted on LinkedIn and so forth, from Royal Canin. So this is part of the Mars Group, so Chicago-based company, always close to my heart because I live there.
There's the pet food part of Mars, right? Right.
He made a presentation, where they are doing greenfield, right? And I mean, this is not a simple customer, right? And I worked as a consultant in my consultant days when they embraced service-oriented architecture and introduced business process management in the 2008-9 era, something like that, right? It was interesting to hear that the rationale, right, for why they're doing this is very much built on what we discussed 20 years ago, which was to have the ability to have your own processes, vis-a-vis your standardized processes, and having a faster deployment cycle, for your own processes, right? Now, many things have shifted, and back to the question about the ecosystem, they were accompanied, by a vendor, and so I guess I'm not going to name them, but this can be looked up, right? Who focused specifically on improving process performance and went about accompanying the company here from a performance optimization perspective, right? And that led to the very strong statement by the CIO that they have stopped seeing the business and the IT sort of as two parties here, but basically consider the whole thing as a business transformation, because it is so intrinsically predicated on performance objectives, way of working objectives, and not to forget, of course, the omnipresent insight aspect, right? With everybody talking about AI, and I would say that's maybe a little bit of a distraction when we think about insight, but definitely the ability to have more real-time, meaningful context available to you as you go through your, business activities, so that you perform them in the best way possible, or maybe can even delegate them and have them automated, right? So if you come from that angle, I think you're good. If you're trying to sell your, 40-year-old SD, pricing type and condition table experience, that's probably not going to get you very far.
And what's any other perspective from Sanna or Bernd about, the ecosystem? Because I still see all these people kicking the cans down the road, doing these brownfield implementations. So no doubt the ecosystem is, helping to perpetuate that. So, but I'm just curious, are they ready? And what's your perspective? Maybe Sanna, do you have a?
Sure. So I think Patrik has an amazing point on the ecosystem, Ross, and your question is very, very valid. I think we are in a really, we are at the cusp of many things that we can change. I think we are exactly where Y2K was, right? 25 years ago. We have the ability to change our next decade and the way we do business. And if by doing brownfields, you're just picking up the code and you're moving it to on-prem or a cloud situation, I think I agree with what Patrik is saying. Business transformation is the way to go. Yeah, can you do a brownfield? Oh, absolutely. There's no reason you can't. But will you have better impact if you make it a business transformation? Absolutely, you will.
Yeah. And so what else do you think? I'm just wondering, as we drill down a bit in readiness for public cloud, trying to give some practical examples for our audience here. And I do want to encourage anybody that's listening in, please drop any comments. We're happy to shift, add. I'm just going to keep poking on a lot of the questions I have that I know come up, but happy for your input. But I'd like to get some, drill down on the readiness for public cloud, because there's all sorts of questions that go on, be it infrastructure, data residency, readiness of your data, security, how to deal with custom code, how to deal with the organizational change, whatever else. But I wonder if we can sort of try to formulate a little bit of a decision tree here. And I'm wondering just, what would be the top 2 or 3 things, if you were a customer that you want to be, focused on right away, that may not be, just what would be the top things where you would start? And maybe we can sort of, start to form a little bit of a decision tree here. I don't know if Bernd, you want to start us off and from your own perspective?
Yeah, so I believe moving to the cloud is a big change for system integrators. We talked about the ecosystem, but also for customers. I think you have to invest in knowledge also. You can't do it with the mindset from the past. So I think you have to start with your people and train them and also set up the organization in a way that you can somehow digest such a cloud transformation program. And I think the whole ecosystem has to move in that direction. So I think that's number one, really having the right people on board. It's also the question, can everybody follow that journey? So sometimes you have a workforce that will not make it, this shift, right? So they are used in the old way of working, and I think you need a sort of a new team who is supporting you on that, and maybe find a good place for the ones who can't follow that path. So I think that's number one. And then, of course, the whole ecosystem has to follow, right? It's not only the customer. So if the customer is ready, but the ecosystem is not ready, and I think that's also a blocking issue, because if the whole implementation system integrators, they're still working in the old-fashioned way, you won't get the support that you need because you don't have all the skills internally. So I think it needs a complete movement of the ecosystem in order to be ready, and the customer should focus on knowledge building at the beginning to be ready, and then pick out the right partners who can follow you on that. You see also new players in the market when it comes to public cloud implementations. Yeah, some of the standard players, they're struggling because they earn good money with the way how they did these transformation programs in the past. So they don't necessarily see a need to make a quick change. So they stick to the old model, and there are new players coming in who somehow cannibalize that market. And one thing where I'm still struggling, I mean, when we look in the SAP world with public cloud and with the private cloud and on-premise, then we see most of the public cloud customers are new customers, net new names. So from my perspective, there are not enough customers who really come from the, in brackets, old SAP world into the public cloud world. Yeah, so I would like to see more customers going on that journey. And I believe one of the reasons is, of course, there's a cheap way also to make this technical migration, right? So this lift and shift brownfield. I mean, there is lots of tooling available where you can somehow bring your whole environment on S4, but not in public cloud. And I think that's maybe a two-step strategy. I would rather motivate the clients to go the ultimate way to public cloud immediately instead of making this interim step and having a massive maybe transformation project soon in future. So that's still something where I hope the market will change a bit.
And wanting to add to what you described around the people side and what we talked about earlier, if I think about the first decision, Sanna sort of mentioned, can I run standard? Or I'm wondering if it's even more strategically as a business is, do I want to be in the world of having like a custom ERP, like, almost like an executive decision that kind of says, why not go standard? Like almost that mentally, is that kind of like the first decision that companies need to make, or is that a decision later on after they get educated? I'm just trying to think of a decision tree. Do you have that executive decision to say, let's start out by saying, why not standard? Why not in that lens to more public? And then part of the next step is getting the people ramped up so they can make that sort of determination and get the right partner involved so that they're not guided to looking at the past, they're looking to the future. So it's, is that, I'm just wondering, where would you find that executive decision of standard? Does it come a bit step 3, or is it actually the first step?
No, it's the first step. I would go with as the first step, honestly.
Okay. So, okay, I'm thinking of that. What about, Sanna, for your perspective, other points in this decision tree that you might say that customers need to, drill into right away?
Sure. Data, definitely, right? I mean, they probably haven't touched data. They don't know, how old the data is or what's going on. So absolutely.
What specifically, data is a big thing. Like, what do they need to decide about data?
I think everything, right, Ross? I mean, from the time that what data is relevant, right? Some organizations have to carry 7 years of data, 10. Some organizations haven't even archived the data, right? The database sizes are so huge. Do you really want to carry all that garbage, right? So you absolutely have to have a data strategy to figure out what data you're going to carry. What is your current master data that needs to go, and what does not need to go to your cloud environment? Because now every time the data is bigger, the size is bigger, you're paying more money. So it's a different thing to think about.
Yeah, that's true. I know I was on the board of a company, and we found that we were spending all this money with Amazon Web Services, only to find it's because they were really big databases, and and they would just spin up new environments to test for customers and leave them up and not realize every time it was sending a bill.
It was going to hit a bill. Yep, that's a different mindset shift, right? To Patrick's point as well, and Bert's point as well.
And what about other things, Sanna, that would be your top 2 or 3 things? So data being one, the executive part, decision making on going to standard. What else would?
Those are my top 2, Ross.
Those are your top 2.
Yes.
And Patrick, anything else that you'd think from your perspective as your top 2 or 3?
I would like to second the data and look at it from a perspective of what data do we need. Yeah. So again, coming back from a conference where IT leaders were discussing trends and so forth, it is very, very clear that regardless the degree of automation that we can achieve, quality of data and being able to connect the dots to see further and be able to sort of see more quickly situations that you can then, leverage for the benefit of serving your customer or achieving, some result in your business, that is the goal that we're after, right? So if we have and I think this is where the business not being in the IT or the leaders, let me say, the leaders that are not part of the IT organization, they might not cast it in those terms because I'm speaking sort of enterprise architectural language here, but they can definitely say, we don't know X, yeah? And if we knew X, then Y, right? So that's, how I would hear it in my company, for instance. And so I think if those things are there, right? If those needs for where information technology comes to the game, we often forget that the IT, and I think I said it in the previous session, starts with I. It's all about information, right? So if we can make, if we have a gap identified there by the business, I think that is the absolute killer, because now this pushes a lot of the other discussions, right? As much as I agree with the importance of having a policy, do we want to do private cloud, public cloud, and do we want to simplify, do we want to standardize? That is a little bit like the choice of tool, let's say, and here technical skill needs to come in. So I don't see a CEO who is not technical really saying that, other than being pushed to say it because it becomes a vehicle of a certain style of managing the IT organization. But I do think that a good proxy to that is, what do you want to get out of the whole thing? Yeah? And that is, I think, precisely that. We could talk about processes and experiences, and I guess that is a similar argument. But the data, or actually bubbling it up, the information, the insight, the ability to act on that. That seems to be where people's hearts are these days.
Yeah, and I think, we had a question from the audience says, do we have an example of any customer that's moved from either SAP legacy or a combination of others that have, gone kind of full on greenfield, whether it be, to RISE or to public cloud, that maybe we can share how they've dealt with some of that, if there's a good example of that you've had from your experience. I don't know if any of us could comment on that.
Yeah, I could comment. So we've done, so I think the question is asked by Hart. Yes, we've absolutely done that. It's a brand new business division. They've decided to go on RISE, and they've brought in some legacy data, because from their parent company, they bought in the legacy data, right? And that is what they've done. They've done a greenfield on a public cloud with some legacy data, which is again talking about the cleanup of the data and then moving to RISE. Yes, absolutely.
And then I guess the second part of the question, dealing with industry specifics or complexities around multi-country currency, things like that, or was that all part of that exercise?
Definitely multi-country and multi-currency, not industry specific.
Okay, but that may be one of the things that, and I don't know if anybody, or the Patrik or Bent, you have any experience, because I think one of the historic things people thought of, that public cloud didn't really handle some of the industry specifics, but I think a lot of progress has been made, if I understand, from SAP. Do you have any experience around that, of how far that's progressed, or is that more of a question for somebody from SAP on the industry specific solutions?
I could answer where SAP stood, when I was with them five years ago. So there was a very good visibility. I have not followed, to be honest, sufficiently. But the stronghold of the public cloud, was professional services, so non-manufacturing businesses. Yeah, so the development at the time was, going towards this direction. So I would assume that we see development specifically in those areas of production and the supply chain area, because that is a forte for SAP to begin with. But yeah, to be honest,
I believe it's with how much SAP is putting into that to bring it to an equivalency. I'm pretty sure that they have made some of that progress. Maybe it's just as a follow-on question that we'll try to post on the LinkedIn site as we get a bit of insight from SAP of just how far they've done from the industry specific parts, because that'll be critical for customers to assess, can they go to standard? Are the if they have various industry solutions, are they available in public cloud?
I think there's a question in the chat about someone who has kind of consolidated multiple business units into Greenfield, and so I don't think that the name has been published, but it's a global chemicals manufacturer, sort of regulated industry to begin with, that brought together 7 ERPs into a Greenfield RISE S/4HANA private cloud edition. So those things exist, and these days it's easy to find them. And the types of benefits are double digits performance increases, for instance, typical month-end close, or being able to do MRP stuff and things like that.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, and I think it's still, the time will tell around those kind of implementations in the public. But maybe as we're getting to the top of the hour, I was just going to sort of wrap up and say this is what I've kind of heard from the panel today around this. One, I think we have to sort of recognize that SAP's future is the public cloud. Similar to other industries, like everybody else, it's almost like you go to Salesforce. It's just everything's public as part of that. And so that's kind of the future there. But in terms of how folks should be thinking about that, what we heard is at the start, they need to think about getting back to standard. It's more of an executive decision. And then after that, in this phase 0, there seems to be a number of elements that we heard. One is get the people, ramped up on what it means to be standard. And I think the note was made about it would be best if they could get early visibility to, ideally how, not just generically how it works, but how it would work specifically, so they can see that system early. And then to bring in a partner who has that mindset as well, that isn't just trying to, move them back to just a technical upgrade because it's an easier way to kick the can down the road. And then to layer on top of that, and once you do that, let's start into the looking at your data, what's really required, so that as you make that move, you're not, burdened down by just having your volume of data, which could get very expensive, and look to those kind of steps as part of that key decision chain as part of it. And I guess the final thing that I sort of heard is this: most of the discussion, this is not a technical decision. This isn't an infrastructure. This is treat it as a business decision about how you're going to improve your business and potentially get rid of a lot of technical debt, which will bring down your cost of operating this and make you, I think, Patrik, you had made the point of it's helping business so that they can be more agile. And similar to the example that you had with the folks from Royal Canin. And I guess the only thing I would encourage everybody to think about that's considering this decision is, if this is where the future is, better to start now and just don't kick the can down the road. That's too easy around that. And I think maybe as a further discussion on a further date, there's kind of questions that we'll need to think about is how do companies help their leadership team to see these benefits as well, because that's a non-trivial thing to make sure that to make the investments and to spend the time to deal with the change associated with getting back to standard is non-trivial. So perhaps a thing for the panel as we look to these future conversations. But I'd like to thank Sana, Patrik, and Bernd for joining us today, and for our audience for participating as well. This live stream will be posted shortly on the web if you'd like to share it with others and participate. And we look forward, we'll be posting shortly our next discussion, which is sort of as a follow-on to a whole series of things that we saw coming out of our last session, which was all about complex work streams and how to align things, which this is just one part of it, which is the decision on public versus private, but that there's a whole lot of others that we hope to drill down on in the coming months, starting with mid-December when we'll have our next one. So I thank the whole group for their participation today, and for everyone else for joining us, and hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you, everyone. All the best. Bye.
Thanks.